Ubuntu 26.04 LTS has officially launched, and for many people, it arrives at the right time. This release focuses on what everyday users care about: speed, stability, security, cleaner design, and hardware support that doesn't feel like a gamble. It is not being pitched as a hobbyist experiment or a niche tool for developers. It is being presented as a serious desktop operating system for normal people who simply want their computer to work. That's why this matters beyond the Linux community. A lot of Windows users are not searching for alternatives because they suddenly became obsessed with open source software. They're searching because they want less friction. They want fewer interruptions, fewer surprises, and more control over the machine they paid for. Ubuntu 26.04 is trying to be the answer to that demand. Not every Ubuntu release creates the same level of interest. Some are routine version bumps, some are stepping stones to the next cycle. Ubuntu 26.04 is different because it is an LTS release, which stands for long-term support. That means 5 years of standard updates, security patches, and maintenance from Canonical. In real-world terms, you can install it, build your workflow around it, and keep using it for years without needing to jump between major versions every few months. That support model matters more than flashy headlines. Most users do not enjoy managing operating systems as a side hobby. They don't want to research every update path or wonder whether a new release will break something important. They want reliability. They want to know the machine they use for work, school, or everyday life will still behave properly next month. That is where Ubuntu's LTS releases have traditionally been strongest, and 26.04 is built to continue that reputation. There is also a trust factor here. When someone leaves Windows, they usually don't want chaos. They want a calmer environment. Ubuntu knows that, which is why this release feels focused on maturity rather than gimmicks. Windows still dominates the desktop for a reason. It has broad software support, deep game compatibility, and years of familiarity behind it. But dominance does not automatically mean every user is happy. Some people are frustrated by updates appearing at the wrong time. Others dislike how much modern computing now revolves around accounts, subscriptions, cloud tie-ins, and persistent prompts. Some users simply feel their older hardware has become slower over time, and many people miss when operating systems felt like tools instead of platforms trying to steer behavior. That frustration created a new opening for Linux, but Linux had its own barriers for years. New users often ran into confusing installs, driver issues, inconsistent interfaces, and advice that started with "open the terminal." For experienced users, that was normal. For everyone else, it was a deal breaker. Ubuntu 26.04 matters because it keeps pushing Linux away from that reputation. The goal is no longer to impress only power users. The goal is to make switching feel realistic for ordinary people. The first thing people judge is the desktop experience. If it looks messy or feels awkward, many users will uninstall the system before they ever discover its strengths. Ubuntu 26.04 ships with GNOME 50, bringing a more polished visual experience with smoother animations, improved responsiveness, better scaling on modern displays, and a more cohesive interface overall. That sounds cosmetic, but it isn't. Design affects confidence. When menus are clear, settings are easier to find, and windows behave predictably, users feel comfortable faster. That comfort increases the chance they stay. Ubuntu's workflow remains refreshingly straightforward. You search for apps, launch what you need, manage files in a clean file manager, use workspaces for multitasking, and organize windows without digging through layers of legacy menus. There is less visual clutter competing for attention. It feels intentional. For many Windows users, the surprise may be how quickly the desktop starts making sense. You do not need to memorize Linux culture to open a browser, edit documents, or manage your files. The basics are where they should be. One of the biggest technical shifts in modern Linux has been the move from the old x.org display system to Wayland. For years, Wayland was discussed as the future. Ubuntu 26.04 turns that future into the standard experience by fully embracing Wayland on the desktop. Why should a regular user care? Because this is not about buzzwords. It affects how the desktop feels. Wayland improves animation smoothness, helps multi-monitor setups behave better, supports modern gestures, reduces screen tearing, and creates stronger security boundaries between apps. Most users will never ask what display server they are using. They should not have to. What they will notice is whether multiple monitors scale correctly, whether dragging windows feels fluid, whether touchpads respond well, and whether the desktop feels modern. Those are the visible benefits. This also signals something bigger. Ubuntu is prioritizing current computing needs rather than dragging old architecture forever. That kind of decision matters if Linux wants to grow beyond enthusiasts. A lot of people tried Linux years ago and walked away because hardware support was rough. Wi-Fi failed. The graphics were unstable. Sleep mode broke. Battery life disappointed. Even when Linux itself was strong, those issues damaged trust. Ubuntu 26.04 ships with Linux kernel 7.0, bringing updated support for newer processors, GPUs, chipsets, power management, and emerging hardware platforms. Canonical specifically highlights optimization for newer Intel and AMD systems, plus broader readiness across desktop, cloud, and enterprise environment. For the average user, the technical details matter less than the outcome, a better chance your device simply works. That includes laptops people rely on every day. If Suspend resumes properly, Wi-Fi connects reliably, Bluetooth behaves, and battery life improves, that removes huge reasons people previously returned to Windows. This is one of the most important parts of the Ubuntu story. Linux doesn't need perfect support for every device on Earth. It needs dependable support for enough mainstream hardware that switching stops feeling risky. For years, if someone mentioned using Linux with an NVIDIA GPU, the reaction often came with warnings. Not impossible, just complicated. Ubuntu 26.04 directly addresses that history with support for the latest NVIDIA production drivers inside its modern desktop stack. Canonical also highlights native repository support for technologies like NVIDIA CUDA, which matters for creators, developers, and AI workloads. This is bigger than gaming. NVIDIA users include video editors, streamers, engineers, 3D artists, researchers, and people doing GPU-accelerated tasks every day. If Linux wants to attract mainstream desktop users, it cannot treat that audience like an afterthought. Does this mean every edge case issue disappears overnight? No operating system works that way, but the direction is clear. Ubuntu wants modern GPU users to feel welcome instead of warned away. That alone could influence many hesitant switchers. Security features are often marketed in ways normal users can't connect to daily life. Ubuntu 26.04 includes changes that are easier to appreciate. One major feature is TPM-backed full disk encryption. On supported systems, encryption can integrate with the security chip already built into many modern PCs. That strengthens protection if the device is lost or physically accessed, while also simplifying secure setups for many users. Ubuntu also continues improving application permission controls and its Security Center experience, helping users better understand what apps can access and how to manage those choices. Then there is a deeper technical shift, more memory-safe components. Canonical highlights expanded use of Rust in security-sensitive tools and system components. Most people will never care what language a utility is written in, but reducing entire categories of memory-related bugs can improve the security baseline for millions of systems. The simple takeaway is this: Ubuntu is trying to make security stronger without making users miserable. Linux has never lacked software. It has often lacked simplicity around software. New users encounter different package formats, multiple stores, command line instructions, and conflicting advice. Ubuntu 26.04 continues improving the App Center and software management experience, including stronger handling for Debian packages and a more unified approach to finding, installing, updating, and removing apps. That matters because normal users judge the basics first. Can I get the apps I need? Can I keep them updated? Can I remove them cleanly? Can I do all that without reading forum threads from 2018? When those basics feel easy, users stay long enough to explore the strengths of the platform. When they feel confusing, people leave quickly. Ubuntu appears to understand that better than ever. Performance is where many Windows users get curious. Linux has long carried a reputation for feeling lighter, quicker, and more responsive in day-to-day use. Ubuntu 26.04 aims to continue that momentum through newer core components, graphics improvements, and broader system-level optimization. While some updates happen behind the scenes, they can still change how the desktop feels every time you sit down to use it. That does not mean every benchmark automatically favors Ubuntu, or that every aging PC suddenly transforms into a powerhouse overnight. Performance is never determined by the operating system alone. It depends on your processor, memory, storage speed, graphics hardware, driver quality, and the type of workload you run. A machine used for gaming, video editing, office work, or heavy multitasking will behave differently under different conditions. What Ubuntu can offer is a cleaner environment with fewer unnecessary layers competing for resources. Many users notice that apps open faster, windows move more smoothly, and the system feels more direct. On computers where people already sense sluggishness, that difference can be immediately noticeable. Sometimes it is not about raw speed at all. It is about reducing friction. Boot times are another example. A system that starts quickly changes your relationship with the device. The same applies to waking from sleep, launching a browser, switching between apps, or handling multiple tasks without hesitation. Those are the moments users experience every single day. There's also long-term performance to consider. Some operating systems feel fine on day one, but become heavier over time as extra services, startup tasks, and background processes accumulate. One reason Linux keeps attracting curious users is that it often feels more controlled and predictable over the long run. So when people ask whether Ubuntu 26.04 is faster, the better question may be this: does it feel better to use? For many users, that answer can matter far more than any chart or benchmark number. Now, for the part many hype videos skip, Ubuntu 26.04 is not perfect for everyone. If your work depends on Windows-only software like specific Adobe tools, niche business applications, or specialized enterprise utilities, you need to test before switching. Linux alternatives exist, compatibility layers exist, web apps exist, but depending on your workflow, those may or may not be enough. There's also still a learning curve. Ubuntu is much easier than old Linux stereotypes suggest, but it is not identical to Windows. Some settings live in different places, some habits need to change, some troubleshooting methods differ. And yes, Ubuntu's recommended hardware expectations are more modern now. Reports note a 6GB RAM baseline recommendation for Ubuntu 26.04, reflecting real-world workloads like modern browsers, video calls, and multitasking. It does not mean the system is locked to that number, but it does show that mainstream desktop Linux is evolving with current demands. Older low-spec machines may still be better served by lighter Linux distributions rather than standard Ubuntu. Ubuntu 26.04 makes a lot of sense for people who mainly use their computers for browsing, office work, media, coding, school, communication, and everyday productivity. It is also appealing for users who value privacy, prefer a cleaner environment, or simply want more control over their system. It is especially attractive for people who have been Linux curious for years but kept waiting for a release that felt mature enough to trust. If, however, your life revolves around one Windows-exclusive application or a heavily specialized corporate setup, the smarter move may be testing Ubuntu first through dual booting, a spare machine, or a live USB session. Switching does not need to be all or nothing. So, is Ubuntu 26.04 the Linux release Windows users have been waiting for? For many people, yes. Not because it magically replaces every Windows workflow overnight. Not because Linux suddenly became effortless in every scenario. And not because everyone should abandon Windows tomorrow. That would be an unrealistic claim. Different users have different needs, and for some people, Windows will still remain the better fit depending on software requirements, gaming preferences, or workplace demands. What makes Ubuntu 26.04 important is that it removes more barriers than many previous Linux releases. The desktop feels cleaner and more polished. Hardware support is stronger, which reduces one of the biggest fears new users have when trying Linux for the first time. Security improvements are easier to understand and easier to value in real-world use. App management is more approachable, which matters because software installation is one of the first things every new user tests. On top of that, long-term support adds confidence, because people want an operating system they can rely on for years instead of constantly re-evaluating. The timing also works in Ubuntu's favor. More users are now willing to consider alternatives than they were a few years ago. Rising hardware demands, growing system complexity, and changing expectations around privacy and control have pushed many people to at least explore other options. If you have ever wondered whether Linux is finally ready for you, this is one of the best versions to test. Run it from a USB drive, install it on a spare machine, or dual boot it beside Windows and use it for a weekend. Because the biggest surprise about Ubuntu 26.04 may not be how much Linux changed. It may be how quickly your old assumptions stop feeling true.